Welcome to today's episode of the Property Trio, the podcast for the sophisticated investor. I'm Cate and I'm joined here with Dave and Mike. Today we're diving into the common ways buyers unknowingly set themselves to fail in the property market. Let's start with mistake number one, which is failing to set clear short and long-term goals. Why is this so important for buyers, Dave?
Look, entering the property market without a plan or without goals is like running a marathon with a blindfold on. You're bound to trip up and face some setbacks. So your plan needs to align with every purchase. Your plan aligns every purchase with your short and long-term financial goals, whether that's building wealth, creating passive income, or achieving early retirement. So, our listeners, you need to make sure you set specific dollar value numbers, especially for income from property. And once you define your goals, then and only then can you work backwards to map out how each property decision contributes to achieving your goals. For example, if your goal is to earn $100,000 in gross rental income before holding costs, and if you assume your average rental yield will be 3.5%, well, you can work backwards and work out what dollar value of properties you need to own to achieve that goal. So it actually turns out to be $2.85 million worth of property at a average yield of 3.5%. That'll get you your $100,000. So from there, you've now got, okay, I know I need 2.85 million of properties in today's dollars. What does that look like? How many properties should I purchase? Should I purchase 3, 4, or 5? What is my budget for that next purchase? What does it look like? So an example might be I plan for $1 million for my first purchase, 800 for my second, 600 for my third, 450,000 for my fourth. Now, the astute listeners who are paying attention will notice that I've gone downwards from the highest value property to the lowest value property. And that generally you want to make the higher end purchases early in your planning because it provides more time for rent, income and capital growth to compound over time. And then you need to estimate the years that you'll make the purchase. And look, the reality is this is almost impossible to do without the software we use for our property plans. But people can play around with Excels and get some sort of estimates. But the reality is, I've never seen an Excel that factors in all the changing pieces over time. There are just too many inputs, let alone, considering factors such as inflation, your changing circumstances, starting a family, private schools, potentially cars, holidays, how the rate of your income is going to increase, et cetera, scaling back employment. But look, as you can see, goals drive your decision making and gives you a path that you can then compare your personal situation against each year. And it keeps your decisions aligned with your vision, even when life throws curveballs at you. And I'll just add that, look, sometimes goals can be seen as zero-sum game, but if you just fall below your goal, don't let that bring you down. Ultimately, it is the systems and processes you have in place to get towards your goals that matter, but the goals give you that roadmap.
I agree 100%, Dave, and it's near enough to 90% of property owners own one or two. Once you get above that, you're in very, very rarefied air, and I think part of the reason is because we don't necessarily value the plan. We look at the hotspot or the property or the deal first, and I've talked about it over and over again. I talk about, you can have your dessert, you got to eat your veggies first, like mum and dad used to say, and the veggies is the plan. It's not as fun or as sexy as, the next booming property hotspot that's going to grow 20% in 12 months. But without that, you can't really hope to build your portfolio to a meaningful level, and mapping it out helps you anticipate the challenges before they happen. It helps you to understand where you might face hurdles or what sort of growth you require to get to that third or fourth property, and the game of finance and lending and cash flow as well. These are all big parts of a property investor's journey, and without a plan, you've got that blindfold on. You'll go somewhere, but it might not be the direction you intended.
So mistake number 2 is jumping into the market without a strategy for your next purchase. What happens if someone makes this mistake, Mike?
Well, they're just going to make decisions that don't necessarily align with their goals. I mean, we're all attracted to shiny things, and sometimes it'll feel like it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, or the market's going to boom, or I've got to get in before the election, or before interest rates drop, or before APRA change their serviceability buffer. But then if you look at all those little things in isolation and you zoom out on a big map, they're blips, right? They're not meaningful blips over 10, 20, 30 year time horizon. So like as an example, you might select a high yielding property for the immediate income rather than focusing on capital growth, which is going to be better for equity growth and hitting your retirement goals. The strategy goes a lot further than just what interest rate am I going to pay and where am I buying this investment property? And Dave's spoken a number of times about interest rate shopping, and really what's more valuable is how does that fit within your goal? So if your goal is to build a big portfolio, it might be actually better to pay a higher interest rate because of the flexibility. But we do need to consider evaluating the potential returns of the property, understanding the market cycles and managing all of the risks like diversification. Are you putting too many eggs in one basket, or are you spreading things out? Things like land tax, which I don't need to talk to you Victorians about. You've won the gold medal for land tax. The mortgage structure obviously is really important as well to help you with aligning your strategy of optimizing the cash flow and the tax side of things as well. And people don't necessarily marry up their purchase price with their saving and cash flow outcomes with any certainty. And I've spoken about it a little bit before. The worst situation you want to be in is buying your first investment property, not understanding the cost impost of that, and being in a position where you're forced to sell, because the cost of getting in and out of property is pretty taxing, and it can derail your strategy or just make investing in property so on the nose that you refuse to go back there. Or maybe you're interested in it but your partner, and we've talked about getting partners on the same page. I mean, those things can derail one side of the equation's appetite for this sort of stuff. So look, this is, I think, the biggest part of the puzzle that people neglect, and other big parts of the puzzle of the family home as well. Because it's one thing to go, all right, we're going to invest, but you have to live somewhere, and then you have to make the decision, well, are we going to rent vest, or are we going to be looking at something modest to upgrade in the future? That all has to be part of the plan. And I mean, it can be hard to just consider what your goals or your needs are 10 years in the future without any certainty, but you can still have a plan that kind of presupposes certain important milestones along the way, or at least where you would like to be in the ballpark in the future. So there's really no argument for me that a plan doesn't have a place for any investor at any stage.
Yeah, really good points, Mike. And I think, that strategy for your next purchase within the longer term plan is so important to ensure that aligns with your long-term goals, your risk profile, your preferred cash flow and savings buffers after you settle on the purchase, and everything you've just mentioned, allowing for any future home purchases. Once you've sorted that out in your strategy, then you can really narrow in and determine the macro location, such as the city or state that best suits your price range, your goals for the property itself for yield and growth, the considerations that you've touched on, such as minimising land tax, owning in different locations for diversification, which may include different states and cities, and also factoring in where different cities are sitting in the property cycle. So you can only take this macro view and planning approach to your next purchase strategy if you start with the goals and the long-term plan. And once you decide on the city and state, you can narrow into the micro of the suburbs and property type.
Well said. Now, Dave, a considered mortgage strategy plays a huge role, doesn't it?
Sure does, Cate. Your mortgage strategy plays a pivotal role, really, in your property plan and strategy for your next purchase. So, as Mike's touched on, I mean, if you focus solely on interest rates, it's usually going to result in missed opportunities. A strategic mortgage structure will enable you to hold firstly, to purchase the right properties, then to retain properties as you grow your portfolio. It'll allow you to optimize your tax deductions and preserve debt to optimize tax deductions for the future if the purpose of a property may change, for example, from a home to an investment. It always should consider how are you managing risk through your mortgage structure. I mean, for most people, their biggest risk is their debt. So it's only logical that you would consider, okay, well, what buffers do I have in place? What's my redraw? How much am I building up in offset? Can I use interest only, not just to maximize tax deductions, but to improve my cash flow? Is it worth fixing potentially, for example, some of my investment loans so I've got certainty around the outgoings on those properties for a number of years? These are all ways you can manage your risk through your mortgage strategy. And our listeners should remember this isn't a one-time effort either. It's not like once you do it once, you never have to look at it again. This requires regular reviewing as your circumstances change, as the market changes, as you're looking to come into your next property purchase or do some sort of renovations. Everything's changing constantly, and so you need to keep coming back and making sure that your mortgage strategy is aligned with your property strategy and your property plans.
Yes. Let's chat about mistake number 3. It's allowing your emotions to dictate decisions, and it can be a difficult mistake to avoid because emotions play such a big role when it comes to property purchasing. Dave, how can emotions hurt the decision-making process?
Look, Cate, property buying, as we all know by nature, it's an emotional experience. And especially when you envisage a home to build memories or invest with aspirations of financial freedom, which, let's face it, that's what we're doing almost all of the time.
Yeah.
So emotions definitely can get the better of us in these situations. So we need to make sure we remove emotions as best as we can. So that might mean trying not to fall in love with the property's aesthetics or succumbing to the fear of missing out, all of which can cloud judgment. Yep. Often people purchase property because they become tired of looking. I know my parents just purchased a property on the day they spotted it when they were living in regional Victoria and looking to buy an investment property. It's done them pretty well, to be honest, and they've held it for probably 20 odd years in Richmond or maybe longer, but it's not always going to work out that way.
And would you argue that they were fatigued and just made that decision, or they're just definitive people and they saw the right property and said, let's just do it?
Yeah, look, it's probably a bit of both.
Yeah.
I think often buyers struggle to realise the level of fatigue they have in the process, and that's when they can make these decisions and then perhaps, readjust their evaluation of the circumstances and what's caused it. I mean, you probably don't see it because you're always working with people directly, but
you certainly do. Even on a client journey, at the start they can be very particular, very finicky, and after a few weeks, they're starting to say, how many more weeks does this have to go for? I then have to have a chat with them and say, that's not how I want you feeling, because I need you to keep your stamina up. I want you to be looking at everything with, open eyes and the right energy, because the day that they're saying, oh, look, I've had enough, just near enough's good enough, I've got to breathe some more life into them and give them a bit of a break from the trail, because that's not what you want people doing.
Yeah, I think often it comes back to not having done enough due diligence, and so they get fatigued. They haven't done the hard yards of dotting the I's, crossing the T's, really having a strict criteria around the type of property they want to purchase, analysing closely, recording in a spreadsheet comparable sales, and that's when you feel a bit, they can feel a bit like their head's underwater, and that's when I think you potentially go, stuff it, let's just buy this one. But that's it can lead to real trouble. And look, perhaps the worst, the emotional decision people can make is selling a good asset due to short-term challenges when they could have held the property if they had have explored further some different ways to alleviate what is generally cash flow challenges. And I also find often, like what we do with our plans, if they're able to raise their eyes and model out what their financial situation could look like, even just 5 to 10 years ahead, if not all the way through to retirement, these types of different perspectives and some planning around how they can improve their cash flow can mean that people can hold on to property that they otherwise would have sold due to what is often, not always, short-term challenges. So, I think people need to remember that residential property investment is almost always a get-rich-slow scheme, and that patience is a virtue if you have a good asset.
Yeah, agreed.
Buying things with buying things with patience and no emotions. Dave, you have a way of taking the fun out of stuff.
Yeah. Save the fun for, that's why you're buying property. Hold on to it, you create wealth, and then you have your fun.
Look, I think you hit on a couple of really good things. I'll be sensible now, I promise people. We tend to zero in on things and forget about the longer time frame of things. And I suppose having a plan, and if you're feeling a little bit anxious about a market that might be flat or declining, and you realise in this plan, well, that property only has to grow by X amount and it's got another 5 or 10 years to do it, that can sort of help you stay the course a little bit, because it's easy to lose patience and make those short-term decisions like this area is booming and this one's in the doldrums, so I might just sell that and get out and get into this one, like it's an easy thing, like you can just swap it, like there isn't stamp duty and agents fees and all those sorts of things. When the emotions really sort of take hold, you can overlook and miss really practical things like the location, the street, the condition of the property, things like light and floor plans, orientations, land to asset ratios, and also really kind of not understanding the financial position that asset will plug into your plan and what it actually achieves, and making sure that it is helping you to go in the right direction.
Yeah, well said, Mike. How can our listeners attempt to remove some of the emotions when purchasing a property?
Well, we have to be objective. I mean, that's not new information. I'm hoping people aren't just dialing in and that's the first question they listen to and I've just told them to be objective, because we all know, right? It's a silly thing to say, but I've heard someone say in the investment space that I would invest in kebabs if they could give me what property does. Unfortunately, they can't. They can only give me cholesterol and heart disease. But if they were an appreciating asset, the argument is just that property doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't really matter what it is. It's a vehicle to where you want to go. And when you start thinking about it like that, or if you start thinking about yourself as the CEO of your property investment business and you hire your buyer's agent who might be the managing director, and you hire your pest and building persons who might be your sort of management consultants, but you're in charge of this kind of thing that you're trying to build, then it becomes less about the actual properties. And so many times I've heard people sort of say, oh yeah, I wouldn't live in that, so I'm not going to buy it. Well, but it's not for you to live in, right? As long as there's enough people that want to live in it in that particular location, that's what's far more important. So the property is really just the means to an end, and it's numbers on a spreadsheet or in a property plan that just help you to get to where you want to go. If you can develop a strategy that's based around non-emotional elements and you can tick off or measure, then that's going to help you make those pragmatic decisions. And also you can focus on selecting properties that align with your goals rather than your personal tastes. As I mentioned before, it doesn't really matter if it's pretty. It doesn't really matter if you could see yourself living in it or other people living in it. It's much better to speak to a local property manager and saying, is there demand for this type of property? And you can go, wow, Isn't that weird? I wouldn't live in that in a million years, but it's just hotcakes sort of stock. That's the way you really need to think of it. If you're purchasing a home, you need to make sure you've got the clear budget, you've selected the suburb and the location, the property type and the land size, and you've got a list of must-haves and then some nice-to-haves off to the side. And then that can sort of reduce some of that buying fatigue as well. I think that buying fatigue can be exacerbated when you're not going in with a clear brief of what you're looking at, because the options just become so vast. Staying grounded to what you want in the home through the written plans can really protect you from being impulsive and then having to wear the cost of the strain of an asset that doesn't kind of fit what you wanted to. And it's a really big investment, so it's worthwhile taking the time to strategize and get clear in your head. I've heard people say before, typically we'll research our next television more completely than our next property purchase or our next holiday. And I think there's some truth in that. And if you're serious about investing in property, the TV probably comes a distant second.
Yeah, very much so. Good analogy. So we're coming up to mistake number 4, which is believing in the get-rich-quick myth. Dave, I'll ask you, why is this dangerous for people to fall into that trap?
Look, I mean, my 20 plus years of being in the mortgage and property industries now, you hear of many horror stories of people flipping properties for quick profits, failed small-time developments or granny flats, and these offer short-term victories for people, so they're enticing. But you always need to assess the downside and be comfortable with it, and that's what I find is often neglected by people. People really don't take the time to think through what are the downside, what are the risks, and often, depending on who they're working with, particularly if someone's trying to sell them on one of these ideas, they don't talk them through these risks. So, you have property spruikers who will sell you on short-term returns, and if they're selling you on anything that is less than 7 to 10 years in residential property, I consider that short-term. So, I'd also say be wary of anyone promising double-digit returns or modelling them out. This will always help you to look very wealthy over the short, mid, and long term. But is it realistic? Is it over-promising? So, as I just mentioned, like anyone who's selling you a property, they're not an advisor. Often they dress up and they look like advisors and they talk like advisors. They try to make themselves appear as though they're a buyer's agent. But make sure you understand, if they're selling a property, that's where they earn their money, and that's why they're not charging you a fee. I'd also say with property generally, if it's shiny and new, be very careful. And the big picture with, if you're buying residential investment properties, as I just sort of mentioned, I think 10 years is short term, 10 to 20 years is midterm, and 20 plus years is long term. And you need to have that sort of level of thinking, because you'd be amazed how much the return you can get the longer you hold an asset. And there's actually, there's maths around this. Like, it can feel like a lot of very little change happens in the first 5 to 7 years, but because of the power of compounding, the longer you're able to hold onto that property, the greater the returns you'll start to realize. So, short-term investment carries high risks, from unpredictable market conditions to expensive renovations to blowouts in cost for developments, and it requires significant expertise and resources. So really, I think unless you are really committed or already are a successful developer, then, you really need to consider more of a get-rich-slow mindset.
It's attractive, those get-rich-quick ones, because there's a story of every different type. Like, this person did splitter stuff, this person did small-scale development, this person just put options on commercial sites and they made $1 billion in 5 minutes. so many stories out there, and for every sort of negative story, you're probably getting 20 that have been positive, because normally the people telling these stories are in the game of selling you something. So why would they come and say, look, I actually messed this up pretty royally, but don't worry, I've got the next one sorted, so give me your money and we'll do really well. It just kind of doesn't work like that. And a lot of the stories out there, unfortunately, are false. You talk about people with certain net asset positions or equity positions or profit positions or portfolio numbers, and unfortunately many of that you can't take to the bank. But you're right, Dave, it should be set and forget, and patience is really important, and really we're just trying to outperform the market. You can't invest in the market, but what we can do is we can find areas that we think have got fundamentals that are going to outperform that market, and that's really just the game. If we can focus on the quality assets and holding them long term, that aligns with your goals and your mortgage strategy, then that's the most important thing. And I think Albert Einstein said compound growth is the eighth wonder of the world, right? And he was a fairly clever bloke.
I love how you bring science into it. Love it.
I do my best. So the compounding on the well-chosen properties can really have that significant increase in value over the decades, and then start to spin off some cash at the back end, ideally as well. It's a strategy that's not going to leap off the page in terms of immediate results. Like, I bought 3 quality properties and I'm now waiting 20 years to get the benefits of that. I mean, that's nobody's pitch, but often that's where the real magic happens. The strategy may not yield those immediate results, but it's low risk. It's a low risk way of building wealth, and it can reduce that stress during the market volatility as well. If you've got a plan and you stick to it and you've put some time into it and you've got some advice from experts, then that can kind of help you weather the storms of all of the stuff every day that the media will tell you. This place is going to boom and this place is going to crash. And, the three of us have had plenty of time with journalists. And I think what we probably have all learned is often the story is already written before they ask you for commentary. And it's a game of circulation and clicks and all that sort of numbers. That's not all journalism. There are some wonderful people out there, but if you just take it at large, it can be pretty dodgy and misleading.
Wow. On that note, we will cover off our last mistake number 5. And this is accumulating properties without considering cash flow and savings buffers. And Dave, something tells me that you've seen this before. So what are some of the things that can go wrong?
Yeah, look, it is a common mistake that we see among property buyers when they accumulate properties quickly on the assumption that owning more assets translates to greater wealth. Often we're trying to clean up the mess after they've worked with often a buyer's agent or someone who hasn't really understood their financial position fully and their cash flows in detail, and they've purchased too many properties too quickly, often all located in similar locations. This can backfire if cash flow savings and equity buffers are not large enough, or the assets to turn out to be lower quality with problematic tenants due to poor and rushed asset selection. Also, you can be unlucky and just purchase, multiple properties in a location in a city that is entering into a flat period of the cycle as well. So the point or the message here is don't get caught up in quantity over quality thinking. One good property is better than 2 duds. Real estate requires substantial ongoing investment with your mortgage payments, your taxes, your maintenance, and possible vacancies, which can drain resources if not carefully managed. So without an adequate cash flow and savings buffer strategy, rapid acquisition can lead to financial strain rather than financial growth. And then that ultimately can lead to selling assets to reduce stress, which we've also seen many times along the journey. So, and look, if the economy turns and you have to pay higher interest rates, which everyone can relate to than expected over which has happened over the last couple of years, if you haven't factored that in, it can cause real issues for people. As can any changes in your employment or family situation that starting a family, it's a very common one. That means income will drop. So to mitigate this, you need to establish a realistic cash flow and buffer plan before each purchase that aligns with your long-term goals, and evaluate whether your current income supports additional properties without sacrificing other financial or lifestyle goals that you have. So investing time in cash flow and buffer analysis helps us prevent overextension and ensures that each property adds to your financial security rather than diminishes it. And remember, it isn't about how many properties you own or how often you purchase. One of our mantras is to help people strive to purchase as few properties as possible to achieve their goals. So, really, why not provide yourself and your family with more time to spend with each other and your friends and relax rather than creating more headaches than you need and life admin.
Yeah, really great point, Dave. I think I like point number 5 the most. From experience, I know what happens as these properties age and deteriorate. You've got to manage them. If you've got lots of cheapies, they might not be close to your capital city or close to home. They might be interstate. And so that adds a whole new degree of costs to any of your maintenance or renovation surcharges, because you're dealing with being present and getting yourself there, or paying for trades that aren't in your local area. And yeah, it's something so many investors overlook, especially your multi-property investors that are really valuing quantity. So something to think about.
It's one you can probably relate to more than most with.
Yeah, absolutely. The most important commodity in life is time, and that's why you invest in property, to provide you with extra income, to give you time. It's all about enhancing the quality of your time, and that's why we want to generate wealth. So thanks, Dave and Mike, for shedding light on these common traps that buyers fall into. For our listeners, remember that success in property investment isn't about luck. Planning your decisions and avoiding these pitfalls can make all the difference between financial strain and achieving your property goals. Stay tuned for our gold nuggets.
Now it's time for us to go mining for our gold nugget property tip of the day.
So my gold nugget is that the key to succeeding in property investment is to view it as a series of informed strategic decisions that align with your short and long-term goals. And you need to reevaluate them as you go. This means setting clear objectives, ensuring your next purchase marries up with your risk tolerance, and the purchase price is set by your preferred cash flow and savings post-settlement on the property. Create a structured plan through to retirement with clear dollar value goals, and remain patient and avoid decisions driven by ego or emotion. Be calculated. The journey is probably not going to be quick or flashy. You only really need to be making one decision every 5 or even 10 years. So, take your time. But the rewards can be substantial when you commit to a thoughtful, disciplined approach and stay the course, especially during the more turbulent and difficult times of life. With an A-grade strategic mortgage broker and a solid property plan in place, each purchase you take with your expert buyer's agent becomes a step towards your own personal version of financial freedom, rather than leaping into the unknown. And you'll have even more cash flow after you get a good quantity surveyor report done on your investment property. So before you dive in, take the time to remove the blindfold and map out your journey. Your future self will thank you.
I love that.
That's great, isn't it?
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, a great plug. And I feel really bad about my gold nugget now, because yours is very sort of sensible and considered. Instead, I went and looked up the Block 2024 results. Now, I don't watch the Block. I think it's a stupid show. It's sort of just entertainment rather than real estate advice. But that Adrian Portelli billionaire bloke bought all of them for $15.03 million. And I think the thing is he's going to give all of them away, or you can pick $8 million. Now, you don't have to be a mathematician to realise that $8 million is less than 15. But there was an article yesterday with a few real estate gurus basically all saying, take the 8 million. And it begs the question, why? It's nearly half the value. But I sort of equate that to the idea of just making ad hoc purchasing decisions. Now, just assuming you're not held back by lack of strategy with mortgage or cash flow, an investor that is just bouncing around doing things that aren't really aligned with their goal is a bit like having 5 properties in wherever they are in Victoria for $15 million. There are experts saying it's actually more beneficial to have nearly half that amount in assets that you can well select yourself. So I think there's something in that. I bloody hope so.
So what happened? I'm not across this. Some billionaire bought all the...
The same guy bought all the properties at auction, and I think he used one of Cate, my friends, to have like he put a little wall in place so that he wasn't exposing the game. So I think he used a buyer's agent, and then he did buy at least one himself. But then it was like a ta-da moment. I bought them all, sort of thing, and he's giving them all away in his lottery business or how it works. So you can either pick to have the $15 million worth of properties, or he'll give someone $8 million in cash.
Right. Okay. Is this the online lottery billionaire guy?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I think he's from Melbourne, isn't he?
He is. Yes.
Yeah. Wow. I'm going to sneak in a gold nugget if I may. It's a quick one. I think one of the key things that we talked about in the 5 mistakes, one of them was emotion. And when it comes to property, there's only one type that you're allowed to be emotional about. You should be entirely emotional so that you're buying the right home. You can go through your shortlist, your checklist, determine your criteria, make sure that you get a property that you love. But in investments, you don't have to love them. You don't even have to like them. You just have to be proud of them.
Yeah, great tip.
I like that.
Good nugget to finish on.
On that note, it was a 3 gold nugget ep. We look forward to having our listeners join us this time next week. So wish you guys a great week. We'll see you soon.
See you then.
See you later.
Bye.